The night before a wedding is supposed to be a sanctuary of joy, a soft prelude to a beautiful dream. The air inside the Devereaux house, our family's historic New Orleans restaurant and home, was thick with the sweet, heavy scent of magnolias, prepared for tomorrow's ceremony. The warm glow of the gas lamps made the antique cypress furniture seem to hum with a life of its own. Everything was perfect, just like the life I was about to step into. I sat before the mirror in my bedroom, dressed in a silk nightgown, gazing at the pristine white wedding dress hanging in silent anticipation. The dress my mother had chosen. She said it would make me look like an angel on my most important day. My heart swelled with excitement. Tomorrow, I would marry Ethan. The man I loved with every fiber of my being. The man who made me believe that a perfect love could truly exist. In my hand, I clutched a small, heavy object. A pair of silver cufflinks I'd had custom made, each one intricately engraved with a pelican, a symbol of our home, of Louisiana, of devotion. I wanted to give them to him tonight, a private good luck charm, a promise from my heart that I would love and be faithful to him forever. I rose slowly, walking out of my room and towards a small guest house in the back garden. The beautiful Creole cottage, once my father's private study, had been set aside for Ethan tonight. In keeping with the old tradition of the bride and groom not seeing each other before the ceremony, a cool breeze drifted from the Mississippi, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak trees my parents had planted together. Every step on the flagstone path was filled with memories, with happiness. As I reached the guest house, I saw the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar, a slice of amber light spilling out. I smiled to myself. He must still be awake, just as excited as I was. I was about to call his name when I heard voices drifting out. The low timbre of Ethan's voice and another, a voice more familiar to me than my own breath, a voice that made my heart lurch, then stop for a terrifying moment. It was my mother's voice. Caroline! What was she doing here? This late? A knot of suspicion and a strange, cold unease tightened in my gut. I crept closer to the door, pressing my ear against the wood, listening intently. Just one more day. Ethan! Be patient. Darling! My mother's voice purred, with a seductive coo I had never heard before. I don't want to be patient, Caroline. Ethan replied, his voice strained. I want you to be mine. And mine alone, not my mother-in-law. Mother-in-law. The word struck me like a sledgehammer. My body went numb, my legs trembling. I told myself I was hearing things, that it was a mistake. Slowly, I moved to the crack in the door and peered inside. The image that met my eyes shattered my entire world in a single, silent explosion. My mother, my beautiful, respected mother, Caroline Devereaux, the woman I revered above all else, was standing in the arms of Ethan, my fiancé. His hands were tracing the lines of her back, while her arms were wrapped around his neck. They were leaning against my father's old mahogany desk, in a place filled with our family's most sacred memories. Easy, my love. My mother chuckled softly. Once you marry Eliza, everything in the Devereaux house will be yours. The property, the investments, every last one of my husband's secret recipes. And we won't have to hide anymore. We'll have a lifetime together. And Eliza? Ethan asked. Her? My mother let out a dismissive laugh. We'll let her stay in the kitchen. A little workhorse, cooking to make us money. It's the only thing she's good at. She's so naive, she'll never know a thing. Her words hurt more than the sight of their embrace. They were 1,000 knives, twisting in my heart. The woman I called mother, the one who gave birth to me, saw me as nothing more than a tool, a stupid slave. And the man I was to marry tomorrow, he was nothing but a wolf, a con artist planning to devour my family's legacy. I didn't scream. I didn't burst through the door. My body was too numb to react. I backed away silently, each step heavy, as if my feet were shackled in chains. The silver cufflinks in my hand, once a symbol of love, now bit into my palm, the sharp edges drawing a thin line of blood. The physical pain was a welcome jolt, waking me from the nightmare that was now my reality. I walked back to my bedroom like a sleepwalker. I closed the door, locked it, and slid to the floor. Not a single tear fell. The grief had transformed into a vast emptiness, which slowly began to crystallize into a cold, diamond-hard rage. They had destroyed my love, my trust. They had trampled on my heart. I looked at the pure white wedding dress. It now looked like a burial shroud for my love and my dreams. The wedding tomorrow would go on, but the bride would not be the same Eliza. They wanted to play a game of deception. Fine. I would play along. but I would be the one to write the final act. I stood up, my face a blank mask. The most cold-blooded plan for revenge was already taking shape in my mind. I picked up my phone, searching for a file I had saved, a recording of a planning meeting for the wedding. Then, I walked to the box of wedding favors. I picked one up, a small, elegant digital photo frame. I carefully pried it open and, with practiced hands, installed a tiny spy camera I had once bought as a novelty. I waited until the house was silent, until I was sure everyone was asleep. I crept back to the guest house. This time, I did not go as a loving bride. I went as an executioner, ready to deliver judgment to the traitors. I placed the digital frame on a bookshelf, in a corner that would capture everything in the room perfectly. Then, I slipped away like a shadow in the night. The longest night of my life had only just begun, and the dawn of tomorrow would be the dawn of judgment. I didn't sleep at all. I sat motionless in the chair by my window, watching the inky blackness slowly fade to a bleak gray dawn. My eyes were wide open, but behind them was a hollow, empty void. The images and sounds from the guest house played in a loop in my head, a film stuck on a single, horrifying scene. The pain was too deep for tears. It had frozen into a block of ice in the center of my chest. As the first light of day broke, the house began to stir with life. The footsteps of the wedding planners, the chatter of relatives arriving, the innocent laughter. It all sounded like a cruel joke. No one knew the real tragedy had already occurred, and no one knew that the grand play I was about to direct would begin in just a few hours. A soft knock on the door. "Eliza, honey, are you awake? The makeup artist is here." It was my mother's voice, feigning warmth and concern. "I'm awake, Mom. You can come in," I replied, my voice a perfect imitation of cheerful anticipation. The door opened, and my mother swept in, radiant in a champagne-colored silk dress, her face a mask of perfect joy. She looked so happy with her betrayal. "Did you sleep well, my darling daughter?" she asked, stroking my hair. Her touch made my skin crawl. It took all my strength to suppress a wave of nausea and smile back at her. "The best sleep ever, Mom. I dreamt of the wedding. I dreamt it was the most beautiful day." "Of course, it will be." She beamed, oblivious to the fact that her smile would soon be wiped from her face forever. I sat before the mirror, letting the artists work their magic, covering the exhaustion and pain under layers of foundation and color. I was putting on a mask of a happy bride, and I wore it flawlessly. I smiled. I laughed. I chatted with everyone who entered the room. But inside, my heart was a tomb. Auntie Anna, my mother's sister, came into the room. She was the head chef of our restaurant, a quiet, observant woman who had always been my true champion. She looked at my reflection, her gaze sharp and questioning. She must have seen something in my eyes that others missed. "You okay, Lisa?" she asked quietly, while others bustled around. I met her eyes in the mirror, nearly breaking down and telling her everything. But I couldn't. This was my war, and I had to fight it alone. "Of course, Auntie. Why wouldn't I be? It's my big day." I deflected with a bright smile. Auntie Anna didn't press. She just squeezed my shoulder gently, a silent, meaningful gesture of support. She knew something was wrong, but she chose to trust my judgment. When I was finally dressed, my mother came to help me with the final touches. As she zipped up my gown, she whispered in my ear, "Tonight, after the reception, I need to have a word with Ethan. Some important business about managing the restaurant." The lie was so smooth. She was planning to rendezvous with my husband on my wedding night. A fresh wave of rage surged through me, but I kept my composure. "Of course, Mom. Whatever you need," I replied with a smile. When I stood in the full bridal gown, everyone gasped. "So beautiful. Eliza, you look like a princess." I walked to the full-length mirror. The reflection showed a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a fairy tale. But I didn't see myself. I saw an actress, about to take the stage for the most important performance of her life. My phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Audio and video were clear, awaiting instructions for the file. It was from the discreet digital forensics expert I had hired last night. I had tasked him with accessing the camera's cloud storage, pulling the data, and editing the most crucial parts into a single clip. I couldn't afford any mistakes. I deleted the text immediately. A few moments later, the video file arrived in my secure mail. I ducked into the bathroom to watch it. The images and sounds were shockingly clear. The sight of my mother and fiancé, their damning conversation plotting to steal my life from me. It was the evidence that would seal their fate. I downloaded the file onto a tiny, disguised USB drive and hid it deep within my bridal bouquet, nestled among the stems of the white roses. Everything was ready. My weapon was armed. All that was left was to wait for the right moment to pull the trigger. I walked out of the room, my face adorned with the sweetest smile. I was ready for the cathedral, ready to walk down the aisle to the altar, where I would turn a wedding into an execution. The procession of wedding cars moved slowly from the Devereux house. I sat in the back of a vintage white Rolls-Royce, a car my mother had rented to make a grand statement. She sat beside me, her hand holding mine tightly, playing the part of the devoted mother flawlessly. "Are you excited, darling?" she asked with a smile. "A little," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I looked out the window at the familiar scenery of New Orleans, the car heading towards the iconic St. Louis Cathedral in the French Quarter. Every image sparked a memory. Once beautiful, now poisoned by betrayal. I remembered Ethan's proposal on a steamboat on the Mississippi. The way he knelt before me, promising a lifetime of happiness. His words, so sweet then, were now nothing but sugar-coated lies. I remembered bringing him home to meet my family for the first time. My father, who was still alive then, had looked at Ethan with an unreadable expression. Dad was a quiet man who could see right through people. He must have seen something I was blind to. That night, he had told me, "A good love, Eliza, isn't about changing yourself for someone. It's about feeling completely yourself when you're with them." Remember that? I didn't fully understand it then. I understood it with perfect, painful clarity now. I had spent my life trying to be good enough for my mother and Ethan, trying to be the perfect chef to make her proud, the perfect partner to make him happy. I had given up pieces of myself for them. And this was my reward. The car turned onto Jackson Square. I could see the crowd of guests waiting, powerful business people, local politicians, and socialites. They were my mother's guests, invited to witness her social triumph. They smiled and waved, having no idea they were about to be the audience for a premiere of a tragedy. The car stopped. Ethan, in a sharp white tuxedo, was waiting for me, a slightly anxious smile on his face. He was probably worried his plan might fail. He offered me his arm. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, my bride." I smiled back, taking his arm. His touch was cold, like a snake's. "Are you ready?" I asked, my question layered with hidden meaning. "More ready than I've ever been for anything," he replied confidently. We stood before the great doors of the cathedral. In my hand, I clutched the bouquet, feeling the small, heart shape of the USB drive hidden within. It was my time bomb. Counting down. The sacred notes of the wedding march began to play. The massive doors swung open, revealing it all scattered with white rose petals, leading to the grand altar. Everyone turned and stood. It was the moment every bride dreams of. But for me, it was the walk to the gallows, where I would judge to sinners with my own hands. I took a deep breath and began to walk, my steps firm, my heart a battlefield of grief and resolve. I would make them learn that when you play with fire, you will burn. And the flames of my revenge today would incinerate their false honor to ashes. The holy sound of the grand organ filled the cavernous cathedral. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, catching the beadwork on my gown and making it sparkle. Everyone watched me with admiration, whispering about my beauty, about the perfection of this high society wedding. They didn't know that beneath the serene smile was a shattered heart and a plan colder than ice. I walked beside Ethan, my step steady. I met the eyes of the guests, saw their congratulatory smiles, and smiled back the smile of an actress about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I looked at the front pew and saw my mother, her face beaming, the smile of a victor who thought she had everything under control. Beside her sat Antiana, her face unreadable but her eyes full of worry. She could sense the calm before the storm. When we reached the altar, Ethan whispered, "You are truly stunning. I'm the luckiest man alive. You look very handsome too, my groom," I replied, emphasizing the word my. The kind-faced, elderly priest began the ceremony, speaking of sacred love and union. His every word was a knife twisting in my wound. Love, fidelity, forgiveness. The words were meaningless now. I let the ceremony proceed, patiently waiting for the moment I would turn from bride to judge. I glanced at the two large projector screens on either side of the altar, set up to play a pre-wedding love story video. Today, they would be my instruments of execution. The ceremony reached the vows. The priest turned to Ethan. Do you? Ethan, take Eliza to be your wife, to love and be faithful, in sickness and in health, to honor and respect her, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Ethan said, his voice clear and proud, his eyes full of fake love. Then the priest turned to me. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from excitement, but from adrenaline. It was my time. Do you? Eliza, take Ethan to be your husband, to love and be faithful, in sickness and in health, to honor and respect him, for as long as you both shall live? The cathedral fell silent. I looked into Ethan's eyes, then gave him the sweetest smile I could manage. Instead of answering, I reached for the wireless microphone on the lectern. Everyone looked at me, confused, including Ethan and my mother. They probably thought I was about to say something sentimental. Before I answer the most important question of my life, I began, my voice sweet and clear, echoing through the church. I have a very special gift. A gift for the most important woman in my life, the woman who made this day possible. My whole world. I turned to my mother in the front row and smiled. Mom, this is for you. The guests applauded softly, thinking it a touching mother-daughter moment. My mother's face glowed with pride. She was expecting praise, adoration. I reached into my bouquet, pulled out the tiny USB drive, and handed it to the AV technician standing nearby. Could you please play the file on this? It's a surprise video I prepared for my mother. The technician, though puzzled, complied. Ethan looked at me, bewildered. Eliza, what is this? Why didn't you tell me? A surprise has to be a surprise. Darling. I smiled at him. The last smile I would ever give him. The projector screens flickered to life, but the image that appeared wasn't a romantic photo montage. It was the grainy footage from the guest house. The silent, moving image of my mother and Ethan, wrapped in each other's arms. A hush fell over the cathedral. The guests stared, confused. My mother and Ethan's smiles froze on their faces, their expressions shifting from confusion to panic. What is this? Eliza, Ethan hissed, his voice trembling. Turn it off. Why? I smiled back coldly. The show is just beginning. I gave the technician a nod. The audio came on. Their disgusting conversation boomed through the high-quality speakers. My mother had insisted on installing. Just one more day. Ethan. My mother's seductive purr. I want you to be mine. Not my mother-in-law. Ethan's strained reply. A collective gasp swept through the church. Now they understood. This was real. Hundreds of eyes turned to my mother. Her face was ashen. The disgusting dialogue continued. Once you marry Eliza, everything in the Devereaux house will be yours. And Eliza, let her stay in the kitchen. A little workhorse. She's so naive, she'll never know a thing. That last line was the detonator. An uproar of shocked whispers and condemnations erupted. My God, what is happening? Her own mother, Ethan, pale and sweating, tried to grab the microphone from me. It's not real. It's a deepfake. They're framing me. He shouted desperately. But no one believed him. The evidence was too raw. I stepped away, raising the microphone. A deepfake? Perhaps. But the feeling of being betrayed, you can't fake that. I turned to the guests and bowed gracefully. I must apologize to all of you for this drama. I just wanted you all to see the true nature of the two people I once loved and trusted most in this world. I locked eyes with my mother. Her face was a mask of hatred and defeat. The woman who gave birth to me, but whose jealousy and greed led her to conspire against her own daughter. I then turned to Ethan, who stood trembling, and the other, the man who knelt and swore his eternal love, but who was nothing more than a parasite, more in love with my inheritance than with me. I paused, letting the truth sink in. They thought I was a fool, but they forgot the greatest gift my father left me was not his recipes, but his ability to see people for who they truly are. So, to answer the priest's question, do I take this man to be my husband? I looked at Ethan one last time, my eyes empty of all emotion. My answer is no. My voice was a thunderclap. I cannot marry a man who is sleeping with my own mother. The final sentence was the nail in their coffin. Pure chaos erupted. My mother shrieked and collapsed, unconscious. Amid the bedlam of shouts and flashing cell phone cameras, I stood perfectly still on the altar. My mother was carried out. Ethan stood frozen, a statue of ruin. His life, his reputation, was over. I bowed slightly to the horrified priest, a silent apology for desecrating his sacred space. Then, I reached behind my head and unfastened my long, cathedral-length veil. The expensive French lace, a symbol of purity, fell to the floor like a shed skin. I was shedding my past. I lifted my chin and spoke into the microphone a final time. The wedding reception is, of course, cancelled. However, all the food that has been prepared will be donated to the city's homeless shelters. At least this tragedy can bring some good to someone. Thank you all for coming and for witnessing the truth. My words were precise and final. I placed the microphone down, turned, and walked back down the aisle with my back straight and my head held high. I didn't look back at the wreckage I had left behind. At the cathedral doors, Auntie Anna was waiting. She said nothing, just pulled me into a tight, strong hug. It was in the safety of her arms that the first tear finally escaped my eye. Let's go home. Eliza, she whispered. Let's go home. We pushed through the swarm of reporters that had already gathered and got into the car. This time, I was not returning as a bride. I was returning as a warrior, victorious from the greatest battle of her life. In the car, I took out my phone and called the lawyer I had already put on retainer. Hello, Mr. Boudreau. It's Eliza Devereaux. The matter we discussed, you can proceed immediately. The war in the cathedral was over. The war in the courtroom was just beginning. I stared out the window as the beautiful cathedral receded from view. I felt no regret, only a profound, hollow exhaustion. Revenge was sweet, but the aftertaste was bitter. I had destroyed two lives, and in doing so, I had also destroyed a part of my own. I didn't know what my future held. I only knew that the old Eliza had died in that church. The woman in this car was someone new. Someone who had to learn to live with scars that would never fade. The aftermath was a media firestorm. The video went viral. The names Devereaux, Ethan, and Caroline were splashed across every news site and tabloid. I was hailed by some as a feminist icon, a woman who refused to be a victim. Others called me cruel, a monster who had publicly destroyed her own family. I paid no mind to any of it. The Devereaux house suffered the most. The reputation my father and grandfather had built over decades crumbled overnight. The once bustling dining room fell silent. Staff resigned. We were a sinking ship. Only Auntie Anna and a few loyal employees remained. My mother, after her release from the hospital, became a recluse in the main house, refusing to see or speak to anyone. She had lost everything. I didn't go to her. The chasm between us was too vast. Ethan vanished, leaving behind a mountain of debt from the lavish lifestyle he had faked. Creditors began showing up at the restaurant. To protect what little we had left, I used my personal savings to pay them off. Our finances were in ruins. I knew if things continued, we would have to close for good. Despair began to set in. One night, sitting alone in the dark, empty kitchen, I looked at a photo of my father and broke down, sobbing. Dad, I whispered, I'm so tired. What do I do now? Auntie Anna found me there. She placed a bowl of hot gumbo in front of me. Eat. Lisa, you need strength to fight. She sat beside me. You did nothing wrong. You chose not to be a victim. Your father would be so proud. Her words were a spark in the darkness. I wasn't fighting for revenge anymore. I was fighting for my father's legacy. I would not let the Devereaux house die. Auntie, I said, my voice firm. We're going to fight. We're going to rebuild it. Our way. Auntie Anna smiled. The first real smile in weeks. I've been waiting to hear you say that. My girl. It seemed impossible. But I have my father's recipe, true soul of the restaurant. I would use that authenticity to fight back. I decided to rebrand. I closed the Devereaux house and, a few months later, reopened in the same space with a new, simpler name, Eliza's Kitchen. We focused on small, intimate dining. No more glitz and glamour. Just honest, soulful Creole cooking. The food my father taught me. Slowly, word began to spread. Then, one evening, Julian Croft, the city's most feared and respected food critic, came in unannounced. He ordered 3 of my father's most classic dishes. He ate in silence, paid his bill, and left. I was terrified. A week later, his review was published. The headline read, "The soul of Devereaux returns to Eliza's kitchen." He didn't mention the scandal. He wrote only of the food, of the lost taste of authentic New Orleans, of the love and honesty in every bite. He concluded, if you want to taste the legend of the Devereaux house in its prime, don't go looking for ghosts. Go to Eliza's Kitchen. The review changed everything. The phone rang off the hook. Old customers returned. tears in their eyes, saying my food tasted like their memories. New customers came, drawn by the hype, and stayed for the quality. Elisa's Kitchen became the most talked about restaurant in New Orleans. I poured my entire life into that kitchen. It was my sanctuary. I had no time or desire for love. The wounds were still too raw. My happiness came from the smiles of my customers and the honor of continuing my father's work. Then, one day, my lawyer called. The police had found Ethan. He was in a sleazy casino near the state line. Emaciated and addicted to drugs. He was extradited to face fraud charges. I felt a flicker of pity, but nothing more. He was a stranger to me now. I heard through the grapevine that my mother had sold her remaining assets and moved into a small, anonymous condo. She lived like a ghost, consumed by shame. A year later, Elisa's Kitchen won the award for Restaurant of the Year, standing on a grand stage. I accepted the award. I dedicate this, I said, my voice shaking slightly, to the man who was my father, my teacher, and my greatest inspiration. I promised to protect the soul of the food he gave me. The applause was deafening. After the ceremony, an editor from a major publisher approached me. She wanted me to write a book, a combination of my recipes and my life story. The offer was a dream, but it meant dredging up the past, reliving the betrayal and the pain all over again. Was I ready to face it? To reopen the wounds that were just beginning to heal? Or was this, perhaps, the final step in my healing? To release the story, to let it go, and truly move on. I drove aimlessly that night, ending up by the banks of the Mississippi, not far from the cathedral. Staring at the dark, flowing water, I knew I had another monumental decision to make. After days of soul-searching, I agreed to write the book. It was a painful but cathartic process. I told the whole truth, not for pity, but as a lesson, as a source of strength for others who might feel trapped and voiceless. The book, The Honest Table, became a bestseller. At a book signing, a frail, elderly woman approached my table. She wore a large hat and dark glasses, but I knew her instantly. It was my mother. She looked a decade older, broken by time and regret. She pushed my book towards me, her hand trembling. "Will you sign this? For me?" "Eliza," she whispered. My heart constricted. What could I write? A condemnation? A bitter memory? Instead, I thought of my father. I picked up the pen and wrote, to my mother, "Caroline, thank you for life's most profound lesson." I signed it simply. With respect, Eliza. I didn't write love, for that would be a lie. But I wrote respect, because she gave me life, and her betrayal, however painful, had forged me into the woman I had become. I handed it back. She read the inscription, and a single tear traced a path down her wrinkled cheek. She nodded once, a gesture of silent, final acknowledgement, and then turned and disappeared into the crowd. That was the last time I ever saw her. A quiet, perfect end to our broken story. In that moment, I have forgiven her, and more importantly, I have forgiven myself. Years passed. Elisa's Kitchen evolved into a world-renowned culinary institute. I traveled the globe, a proud ambassador for my heritage. Today, I stood in my kitchen, not cooking for customers, but teaching a new generation of chefs. The room was alive with passion. Auntie Anna, now gracefully retired but always present, came to my side. "Eliza," she said softly, "there's a guest, an old woman. She's waiting in the garden." My heart gave a familiar flutter. I walked out to the garden, to the table under the magnolia tree. An old, white-haired woman sat with her back to me. It was my mother. She was thinner, more fragile than I could have imagined. I sat down opposite her. We said nothing for a long time. The silence was not angry or awkward, but full of unspoken understanding. "I saw you on television," she said finally, her voice a dry rasp. "I'm so proud of you." "Eliza," I nodded. "Thank you. I came to taste your cooking. Just one last time, if I may." She wasn't asking for forgiveness or money. She was asking, as a customer, to be served by the famous chef her daughter had become. It was the ultimate concession, the ultimate sign of respect. I returned to the kitchen and cooked for her myself. Not a fancy dish from my menu, but a simple bowl of shrimp and grits, her favorite from long ago. The first dish my father had ever taught me to make, just for her. I served it to her myself. She looked at the bowl, and her eyes filled with tears. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and savored the taste of the past. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Just like your father used to make." When she finished, she stood up slowly. "Thank you, Eliza, for everything." She walked away, a stooped figure disappearing down the path, never looking back. That was my form of forgiveness. Not a return to the past, not an erasure of pain, but an acceptance of what was, a release of anger, and a choice to remember the sliver of good that once existed. I returned to my kitchen, to my students, to Aunt Tiana, to my real family. The most beautiful garment a person can wear is not a wedding dress, but the armor of truth and integrity. And today, I wore it with peace, complete and content in the life I had built from the ashes.